They were supposed to be a non-lethal way of subduing suspects. Instead, the use of tasers has resulted in deaths across the country. In Maryland, Attorney General Doug Gansler convened a task force to study the issue of electronic control devices. University of Baltimore law professor F. Michael Higginbotham chaired that task force, and he joins me to talk about the task force's recommendation. Welcome back to On Time.
Good to be here, Kai, especially to talk about such an important issue.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get the technical name of them. I said TASER, but that's probably like saying Xerox. It's pretty much a copyrighted name. Is it correct? That's a specific product.
It is. It's a specific product, and the general term is electronic weapon device or electronic control device.
Okay. People know that term because I guess that particular product has come into play. How would you define what an electronic control device is?
Well, it's a good question, and I wish I could give you a good answer. One of the things about serving on a task force like this is that you learn how much you don't know. I was
okay.
Sort of like a deer in the headlights.
Absolutely.
But basically what an electronic device is, it sends a shock to an individual that incapacitates that individual, stops muscular control, and so basically they can't move.
In your research, did you find out whether and first of all, how many companies make these, Professor Higginbotham?
Just two companies.
Two?
Just two.
Where are they based?
Primarily in the United States. In Arizona is the main company.
Okay. And of these devices in their development, was the medical community a part of them? So in other words, I'm thinking, if I'm developing a product that's going to send a shock to the body to try and stop a person or incapacitate them so they can be, controlled and arrested, I'd want to know how much electricity I need to put in their body so that it's not harmful to them long term or even fatal.
Sure. The medical community has been involved in the creation of the devices and has looked at their improvement over the years. But there is controversy, of course, surrounding the physiological effects of the device, and that's one of the things that the report discusses, is additional research needs to be done to determine what exactly are the physiological effects.
This is on the page here we're watching, or on the screen, people are seeing the actual task force report. This is what it looked like. It's more than 100 pages, is that correct?
It is indeed 100 pages and 72 recommendations contained in it. It was an amazing process, very comprehensive report, and actually we are one of the first states, if not the first state, to do a comprehensive report on electronic weapons. So the Attorney General deserves a great deal of credit for creating this task force.
This is a proactive move on the Attorney General's part to look into this. Who was the task force comprised of?
The Attorney General asked me to chair up the task force, and I was put in charge of getting the members. We had an amazing group, 15 members strong, members from active law enforcement, active civil rights organizations, lawyers, doctors, and academia. Right. So we had a very broad range of constituencies that were represented.
Let's get to the first issue. How widespread are the use of electronic control devices in Maryland?
It's actually pretty widespread. We did a report. We sent it out to 32 agencies, and of the 32 agencies we sent the report out to, 24 actually use electronic weapon devices.
That's quite a few.
It is.
How about the Maryland State Police?
Maryland State Police do use it.
Okay. And as you went through your research, tell me about a few key things that you found out about these devices as it relates to law enforcement, as it relates to people who've been tasered.
Sure.
For lack of a better word here.
Sure. You could say shocked as well. But I learned a great deal about this, and one of the things I think is a real benefit of this report is that there are a lot of people who think these devices are much more dangerous and harmful than they actually are. On the other hand, there's a lot of people that think they're less harmful than they actually are. And I think the real benefit of this report is that it gives a dose of reality to the misperceptions that are out there. For example, a lot of people think that these devices cause more harm than they do. When they are deployed, there are very few instances of serious injury or death. And so the studies indicate 0.03 to 0.05 deaths or serious injuries occur based upon deployments.
Okay.
So it's a very small number. On the other hand, there are a lot of people that think these devices are not lethal, and that is not correct, because on rare occasions, they do result in death,
Right.
and that needs to be known.
And does your report distinguish, and does it matter whether someone has a pre-existing medical condition that might make them susceptible to death after being shocked by one of these devices?
Very important aspect. We wanted to get that out to law enforcement as well as to civilian population. When these devices are used appropriately, it minimizes the risk of serious harm and death. On the other hand, even when they're used appropriately, death and serious injury can occur.
Okay.
And so this people need to be aware of that. Now, when it's used inappropriately, that raises the risk of serious harm and death. And many of the injuries have occurred to people that were in high-risk categories.
Right.
And so if this had been known to law enforcement, they may not have used the device. For example, if a person is on a high ledge, you don't want to use this device because
Right.
it will incapacitate them. They will fall off of the ledge and
Right.
they may die from the fall.
Right.
If they're in water, they may drown because when you use this device,
Right.
their muscle function will cease.
What you're saying sounds obvious, but they are issues that need to be discussed, as obvious as they may sound and seem.
Not only do they need to be discussed, law enforcement needs to be aware of them.
Right.
Because, candidly, law enforcement is not going to use them
Right.
when they are in situations that will knowingly result in death.
Here in Maryland, and again, what your study's looking at wasn't just Maryland, but the overall use of these devices, correct?
Well, we focused on Maryland, but we did, of course, consider how the device has been used and examined in other locations.
Okay. Here in Maryland, we have had, tell me about the number of deaths we've had in Maryland.
We've had 9 deaths since 2004 when the device sort of came into usage in Maryland. So
Now-
9 deaths.
Now, to a layperson, and I don't know all the details of the study, that may seem high.
Yeah. The thing is, the device has been used a great deal. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of percentages, it's a very low percentage that has resulted in death. But anytime someone dies, it's a serious matter.
Right.
It's a serious matter for their family, for their friends, and for the law enforcement person who was involved in the incident.
Of those 9 deaths, if you did this in the study, Professor Higginbotham, were there any similarities, any commonalities, anything that you were able to come to a conclusion about for the report?
Well, this is a real difficult area, Kai, and what we found out is that in terms of medical examiners looking at this, one of the real controversies is whether or not the electronic device was the cause of the death, or whether or not there were other reasons that the person died outside of the use of the electronic weapon. Is very controversial. If you look at many of the reports by medical examiners, they basically say that they are not certain as to whether or not the electronic device was a proximate cause of the death.
Here's what we do know. Outside of that person being hit by a truck or having a heart attack, having the device at that minute certainly didn't help them sustain life.
Well, what you can be certain is that when the device was used, death resulted. The question is, was the death a direct cause from the ECW use, from the electronic weapons device?
Either way, again, if the intent is to be a non-lethal way of subduing a suspect, if there's even one death, then the device is not accomplishing its goal, is it?
Well, what people need to understand, law enforcement as well as civilians, this device is a lethal weapon. And a lot of people, it is a lethal weapon.
I'm sure the company doesn't like to hear you say that.
It is less lethal.
Okay.
It is less lethal than other weapons.
All right.
But it is a lethal weapon because death can result. And we had 9 deaths in Maryland after an ECW was deployed on people.
How do the companies, the two companies that market them, in as much as you know, Professor Higginbotham, market them? Do they market them as non-lethal weapons, or do they market them as weapons to get people under control that could have fatal consequences?
The device can be a very effective law enforcement tool. It is marketed as a non-lethal weapon. On the other hand, as we have seen over the last decade, in looking at the studies that have been done, deaths have resulted.
As we wrap up here, we have to go. What final recommendations are coming out of this study?
72 recommendations in this report, very important recommendations. In my judgment, if the legislature adopts broadly these recommendations, we're going to do three things. We're going to save lives in Maryland, we are going to reduce injuries, and we're also going to improve community police relations.
Okay. By the way, you wanted to point out that police aren't the only ones in Maryland who can carry electronic control devices right now, is that correct?
That is correct. A law was passed last year that allows for civilian purchases, and what our report also talks about is that needs to be looked at very seriously.
Okay.
The Assembly needs to think about that. Right. But if civilians are allowed to purchase, then we must have limitations on that in terms of background checks, in terms of training for civilians to use the weapons.
Michael Higginbotham, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it. It's a very important topic, and we hope, are people able to go online and look at this report?
Absolutely. Go on the Attorney General's website, and the report is available. Okay.
Professor Higginbotham, thank you for joining us. If you'd like more information on the task force's recommendations, contact the Maryland Attorney General's office at 410-576-6300 or go to oag.state.md.us.